Mom called me mistake after my golden sister was born, and, at 18, she kicked me out to make room. I worked hard to pay the rent, but one move changed everything. Growing up, my mom and I had a pretty good relationship. She wasn't perfect, but she was the kind of mom who made sure I was fed, loved, and felt safe. She always called me her little star, and I really believed her. I never doubted her love for me. Things were good until my sister, Grace, was born. Grace was apparently everything my mother had dreamed of. She was blonde and beautiful, with bright blue eyes that everyone seemed to be swooning over. From the moment she came home from the hospital, it was as if my mother had flipped a switch. Suddenly, her world revolved around Grace, and I was, well, just there. At first I thought it was just the excitement of having a new baby in the house. But the months turned into years, and I realized something had changed forever. By the time Grace turned 3, I had unofficially become her babysitter. Mom would give her to me and tell me to keep her occupied while she rested or went out. By the time she was 8, I was making her meals and cleaning up after her messes. My childhood, or what was left of it, was basically over. I once overheard her telling my aunt at a family gathering that Grace was her second chance. That comment stuck with me. A second chance at what? Did she mean I was her first mistake? I never asked her directly, but it haunted me. It began to make sense when she was less subtle. Grace deserves everything I couldn't give you, she said one day when I asked why she no longer came to my school plays or helped me with my homework. You understand, don't you? I didn't, but I nodded. When I turned 18, things escalated. Grace was 12 at the time, and she had started demanding her own room. We lived in a 3-bedroom house, so it wasn't like we were cramped, but my mom decided my room was the problem. You're 18 now, she said one night, casually, as if talking about the weather. It's time for you to move out and make room for your sister. I laughed at first, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. Within 2 months, I was packing my bags and looking for a place I could afford on my part-time job's salary. My mom didn't even pretend to feel bad about it. This will be good for you, she said, as if kicking me out was some kind of character-building exercise. She barely looked up as I walked out the door with my last box. Little did I know that was just the beginning. I didn't have a plan, but I didn't have a choice. I found a tiny room in a shared apartment about 30 minutes from my hometown. It wasn't much, barely big enough for a bed and a desk, but it was all I could afford. I picked up as many hours as I could at my job, working late nights and weekends just to cover rent and food. It was exhausting. I remember lying in bed some nights, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my mother ever thought about me. Did she even care how I was? Did Grace ask where I was? There were no phone calls, no messages, not even a text. It was as if I had been erased from the family. A few months after moving out, I decided to take a chance and move to New York. It wasn't the most logical decision, but I thought maybe a change of scenery would help. I had always dreamed of living there, and part of me wanted to prove that I could make it on my own, that I didn't need my family. New York was everything I imagined and nothing I expected. The city had this energy that made me feel alive, but it also drained me in ways I wasn't prepared for. The rent was sky high, and the jobs I could find barely covered the basics. I worked at a coffee shop during the day and delivered food at night. I'd leave my tiny apartment at sunrise and be back after midnight most days. It was brutal, but I didn't complain. I told myself it was the price of independence, of proving I wasn't a mistake. And for a while, I convinced myself that I was okay. I didn't talk to my mom or Grace at all during that time. They didn't reach out to me, and I didn't see the point in trying. But then one night, out of nowhere, my phone rang. It was my mom. I stared at the screen for a good minute, debating whether to answer. I had no idea what she wanted, but curiosity got the better of me. Hey, she said, her voice as casual as if we'd spoken yesterday. We need to talk. I didn't know it then, but that phone call was about to turn my life upside down again. The conversation began awkwardly. My mom asked how I was doing, but it sounded forced, like she was checking a box. After a minute or two of small talk, she cut to the chase. "We're having a family reunion," she said. "It would mean a lot if you could come." I almost laughed out loud. A family reunion? Since when had they even considered me part of the family? I hadn't seen or spoken to them in 2 years. "Why now?" I asked, unable to hide my skepticism. There was a pause. "Well, we've all missed you," she finally said, though it didn't sound convincing. "And Grace has some big news. She wants to share it with everyone." Grace. Of course. It was always about Grace. I felt the familiar bitterness rise, but I pushed it down. Part of me wanted to say no, to hang up and forget the call ever happened. But another part, the part that still longed for some kind of connection with my family, said yes. "Okay," I said. "I'll come." The reunion was scheduled for the following weekend. I spent the days leading up to it wondering if I had made the right choice. I didn't know what to expect, but I figured it couldn't be any worse than it had been. Maybe this was my mom's way of making amends. Maybe Grace wanted to apologize for the way things had turned out. I borrowed a friend's car and drove back to my hometown the day of the reunion. The house looked exactly the same, but walking inside felt strange, like I was walking into someone else's life. My mom greeted me at the door with a quick hug and acted like everything was normal. Grace was in the living room, beaming as always, surrounded by relatives fawning over her. When she saw me, she ran over and hugged me like we were best friends. "I'm so glad you came," she said, her excitement almost convincing. I didn't have much time to process the moment before my mom called everyone together. "We have an announcement," she said, beaming. Grace stepped forward, holding up her hand to show off a shiny engagement ring. "I'm getting married," she announced. The room erupted with cheers and congratulations. My mother was practically in tears, talking about how proud she was and how Grace's fiancé was perfect for her. I stood there clapping politely, feeling more out of place than ever. Then my mom turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We wanted you to be here for this," she said. "And well, we could really use your help." I didn't like where this was going. I should have known the reunion wasn't just about reconnecting. My mom never did anything without a reason. Still, I played along, letting her talk while everyone else went back to celebrating Grace's engagement. "We're so happy for Grace," she said, leading me into the kitchen for some privacy. "But weddings are expensive, you know." There it was. She went on, explaining that they'd already spent a lot on the engagement party, and that Grace deserved a perfect wedding. "It's just, we're a little short right now," she said, looking at me. "And I know you've been working so hard in town. We were hoping you could help out a little." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 2 years of silence, and now they wanted me to help pay for Grace's wedding? "How much are we talking?" I asked, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "Oh, nothing too crazy," she said quickly. "Just a few thousand. Maybe 7? I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to admit that this was some kind of twisted joke. But she was serious. She actually thought I could or would just hand over $7,000. I wanted to say no, to tell her to find out for herself. But something held me back. Maybe it was the lingering hope that helping out would finally make her see me as part of the family again. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, as if she expected me to prove myself. "Let me think about it," I finally said. The rest of the night was a blur. I sat through the reunion, watching everyone fuss over Grace and her fiancé while feeling like a guest in my own family. When it was finally over, I drove back to the city, my mind racing. 4 days I walked back and forth. Part of me wanted to say a firm no and block their numbers. But another part, the part that still wanted to belong, convinced me to do it. I wired the money that weekend. $7,000. It was everything I had managed to save from working 2 jobs. I told myself it would be worth it if it meant I could finally make things right with my mom and Grace. What I didn't know was how much I would regret that decision. After I sent the money, I waited for some kind of acknowledgement. A thank you, a text, something to show that they appreciated what I'd just done. Days went by, then a week, and nothing. Finally, I gave in and called my mother. She answered on the third ring, sounding busy. "Hey," I said. "I just wanted to see if you got the money I sent." "Oh yeah," she said, almost as if she'd forgotten. "Thanks for that. It's really going to help Grace with everything." That was it. "No. I'm proud of you." "No. You didn't have to do that. Just a quick thank you and back to business." I hung up feeling stupid. I had emptied my savings to help them, and it hardly seemed to register. But I tried to put the bitterness aside. Maybe this was just the beginning of something better. Maybe I just had to be patient. Over the next few weeks, I heard bits and pieces of the wedding through Facebook posts and distant relatives. Grace was going all out, designer dress, fancy venue, the works. It was clear that my $7,000 had gone directly into making her dream wedding a reality. I wasn't invited. At first I thought it was a mistake. Surely they wouldn't leave me out after all I'd done. But when I called my mom to ask about it, her answer blew me away. "Well, it's a small wedding," she said, as if that explained everything. "And Grace and her fiancé wanted to keep it intimate. You understand, right?" I didn't. I hung up and stared at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. They took my money, used it to pay for a wedding I wasn't even allowed to attend, and didn't see anything wrong with it. I felt sick. The worst part wasn't even the money, it was the realization that I still didn't matter to them. No amount of sacrifice was going to change that. From that moment on, I decided I was done. Done trying to earn their approval, done pretending I was part of their family. They had made it clear where I stood, and I wasn't going to waste any more of my energy on them. But even now, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. In the days following the phone call, I replayed everything in my head. I thought about every late night I'd worked, every shift I'd pulled, every corner I'd cut to save money, and for what? So my mom and Grace could have their little fairy tale while I watched from the sidelines? I tried to distract myself by throwing myself into work, but the bitterness followed me everywhere I went. I couldn't stop thinking about how easily I'd let them take advantage of me. It wasn't just the money, it was the fact that I'd let myself believe, even for a second, that helping them would mean anything. I unfollowed Grace on social media. I couldn't stand the endless posts about counting down the days, and pictures of her trying on wedding dresses. Every smiling selfie felt like a slap in the face. I also stopped calling my mom. Not that she seemed to notice. The silence between us grew, and for the first time, I didn't feel bad about it. If they didn't care enough to include me, then I wasn't going to chase them anymore. But the regret didn't go away. Every time I checked my bank balance, it hit me again. That money could have gone toward a better apartment, or paid off some of my debt. It could have been a safety net if something went wrong. Instead, it was gone, spent on a wedding I wasn't even allowed to attend. I thought about calling my mom and asking for the money back, but I knew it would be pointless. She'd probably guilt me into thinking I was selfish for even asking. One night, as I sat in my tiny apartment eating instant ramen for the third time that week, I decided I had to stop waiting for an apology that would never come. I didn't owe them anything anymore. I made a promise to myself that night. I was done with them this time for good. Weeks turned into months, and I stuck with my decision to cut ties with my mom and Grace. At first it felt like I'd lost a part of myself, but over time I realized it was more like shedding dead weight. I began to focus on my own life for the first time in years. I put in extra hours at work to rebuild my savings. Slowly, I began to dig myself out of the financial hole I'd dug myself into. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I still lay awake, angry and hurt at everything that had happened. But I told myself that I was moving forward, even if it didn't feel like it. Then, out of the blue, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Grace. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, torn between curiosity and annoyance. Against my better judgment, I answered. "What's up?" She called me almost immediately. I answered and her voice came through, overly cheerful. "I just wanted to thank you for helping with the wedding," she said. "It was beautiful. You should have seen it." The casual way she said it made my blood boil. "I didn't see it because I wasn't invited," I snapped. There was a pause, and then she sighed. "Yeah, about that. Mom didn't think it was a good idea to invite you. She thought it would be embarrassing." "Embarrassing for who? You or her?" She didn't answer. Instead, she shifted gears and told me how stressful it had been to plan everything and how she and her husband were already thinking about starting a family. She rambled on, and I could barely concentrate on her words. All I could think about was how selfish they were, how none of them cared about how I felt. When she finally stopped talking, I took a deep breath. "Why are you really calling, Grace?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "We're trying to buy a house, and the down payment is a little more than we expected. I was wondering if you could help us out again." I laughed. It was the kind of laugh that comes from disbelief, from realizing how little someone respects you. "Are you serious?" "It's just a loan," she said quickly. "We'll pay you back. I promise." I hung up without another word. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I wasn't going to let them use me again. That phone call was a turning point for me. It made me realize that I'd been waiting for them to change, to finally treat me like I mattered. But they never would. And for the first time, I was okay with that. Months went by, and I kept my resolve to keep my distance. Life in New York was still hard, but at least it was mine. I no longer poured my energy into people who didn't deserve it. Every once in a while, though, I'd wonder what was going on back home. One night, while scrolling through social media, I came across a post from a mutual acquaintance. It was Grace. She was out with friends, laughing and holding a glass of wine. But something about the caption caught my eye. "Starting over and loving it." I frowned, clicked on her profile, and scrolled through her recent posts. There was no sign of her husband. No lovey-dovey pictures, no anniversary celebrations. Just a lot of vague posts about new beginnings and finding herself. It didn't take long to confirm it. Grace and her husband were separated. I found out through some mutual connections that they'd divorced after less than a year of marriage. Apparently, they had rushed into things too quickly, and it all fell apart once the honeymoon period was over. I should have felt sorry for them, but all I could think about was the money. $7,000 spent on a wedding that lasted all of 10 months. It was like pouring gasoline on my anger. A small part of me thought it might be karma, that this was the universe's way of balancing the scales. But it didn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would. If anything, it just made me sad for the version of me that was naive enough to think they'd ever change. Still, I wasn't going to reach out. Grace had made her choices, and I wasn't going to let her drag me back into her mess. But life has a funny way of testing your limits. Not long after the divorce news broke, I got another call from my mother. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey," she said, her voice unusually soft. "Did you hear about Grace?" "Yeah, I heard," I said. "What do you want?" "She's having a really hard time," my mother said, ignoring my bluntness. "You know how she is. The divorce was devastating for her. I thought maybe you could come home for a while to support her." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After all this, she still thought it was my job to fix things? "No," I said firmly. "I'm not getting involved." "But your family," she said, like that meant something. "Funny, I don't remember being treated like family when you kicked me out or took my life savings." I shot back. There was a long pause, and I think for the first time she realized I wasn't going to bend this time. "Okay," she said quietly. "If that's the way you feel." It was. And for once, I didn't feel guilty about putting myself first. After that phone call, I expected some kind of fallout, maybe a guilt trip or a tearful plea. But nothing came. The silence was deafening, and I took it as a sign that they had finally understood that I was no longer their safety net. Every once in a while, I'd hear news about Grace through the grapevine. She'd moved back in with my mom after the divorce, and from what I heard, things weren't going well. She'd quit her job, and my mom was having trouble supporting them both. It wasn't my problem, but part of me couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Still, I never reached out. I'd spent too many years putting her needs ahead of my own, and I wasn't about to fall back into that trap. Instead, I focused on building the life I'd always wanted. The first major milestone came when I finally saved enough to move out of my cramped apartment and into a slightly larger one. It wasn't anything fancy, but it felt like a step forward. For the first time, I could actually see a future for myself, one that didn't revolve around trying to please people who didn't care about me. One night I got a call from an unknown number. "Hello?" "Hey," said a familiar voice. It was Grace. I wasn't sure how I should feel. It had been so long since we'd spoken, and hearing her voice brought back a mix of emotions. I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said. "For everything. For the way we treated you, for taking your money, for not inviting you to the wedding, everything." Her words took me by surprise. I didn't know if she was being sincere or if this was some kind of setup for another favor. But for once, she sounded sincere. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she continued, "but I just wanted you to know that I regret the way things turned out." I didn't say much. I wasn't sure if I could trust her, but at the same time, I didn't feel the same anger I used to. Maybe time had softened me, or maybe I was just tired of holding the grudge. "I appreciate you saying that," I finally said. "But I think it's best if we keep our distance. For both our sakes." She didn't argue. She just said goodbye, and that was the last time we spoke. Looking back, I don't regret the way things turned out. I learned the hard way that you can't force people to appreciate you, no matter how much you give. But I also learned that walking away isn't a weakness, it's a strength. The money I lost still hurts, but I gained something far more important, my independence. And I'll always be grateful for that.